Today we're going to talk about bookings, and it's a four episode series. And in this particular part, we're going to talk about booking forecasts and why do they turn out to be wrong more often than not. And again, in the next four episodes, we're going to talk about something that pretty much keeps CFOs up at night. I mean, how do we accurately forecast the bookings? I'm also going to talk to you why most companies get this spectacularly wrong, and what can you do about that? So let me start out with a live scenario that I've observed play out over the years. Last week of the quarter, your CRO tells you there's a $5 million in the pipeline that should be closed, and you're banking on at least $3.5 million to hit your number. And then the quarter ends and you get $2 million. Does that sound familiar? And here's what happened. The pipeline was somewhat fiction. Not because anyone was lying, though sometimes some might be, but because the data underneath the forecast was garbage. The deals in the pipeline that were never really qualified were being featured in the pipeline, close dates that were aspirational rather than based on anything real. And the amounts that represented what the rep hoped to sell, not what the customer actually needed. So this all piled up very quickly, and I've observed that the fundamental problem with how most companies forecast bookings, they treat the CRM as a source of truth when it is actually a collection of wishes and hopes dressed in probability percentages. So sales reps are largely optimists by nature, you know that, and they have to be, but optimism does not make accurate forecasts. Here's another example that crystallized this thought for me a long time ago. I was working with a SaaS company, about $30 million in ARR, and every quarter we used to hear the same story. Pipeline looked great 3 weeks out, forecast kept slipping in the final week, they would miss by 15, sometimes 20%. And the CEO was literally losing patience with the CRO. The board was losing confidence in management. And when I dug into their pipeline, here's what I found. 40% of the deals in the commit forecast had never had a conversation with an economic buyer. 40%. Another 30% had no documentation or next steps beyond we'll follow up next week. And the deal amounts were ballpark guesses. Close dates were set based on when the rep needed to close something, not based on the customer's actual buying process. They were not forecasting. They're hoping they're hoping that that this would hit their spreadsheet in a manner that would allow them to make good forecasts. So when you see the pipeline report, you see the probabilities, you see the weighted forecast, it all looks very scientific. But you don't see the underlying data, which might be fundamentally unreliable. And this creates three very expensive problems for your business. So here are the three. Problem number one, you cannot plan accurately. Should you hire those 3 people next quarter? Should you invest in that new marketing campaign? Should you expand into this new region? All these decisions, they depend on having confidence in your revenue projections. And so when your bookings forecast is consistently wrong, then you're making all of these strategic decisions blind. There's also problem number 2. You lose credibility with the board and the investors. Miss your forecast once, yeah, it's a hiccup. Miss it twice, it becomes a pattern. And miss it 3 quarters in a row, the board starts questioning whether management can execute. And I've observed companies and, they take valuation hits of 20, 30, 40% simply because they could not forecast reliably. Investors price predictability. Unpredictability is very expensive. And then you have problem number 3. You create a culture of sandbagging and gaming. When forecasts are consistently wrong, the smart CROs, they start managing expectations. They sandbag the forecast to create this buffer. And the sales reps, they learn to manipulate the pipeline to look good in reviews. So everyone is playing in this amphitheater, this forecast theater, if you will, instead of actually managing the business. And you end up in this perverse situation where beating the forecast becomes more important than maximizing actual revenue. So why is booking forecasting so important and so hard? I've observed 3 root causes, and I'll tell you why it is hard. The data quality first is terrible. Salesforce is only as good as the data that goes into it. If the reps are not updating opportunities consistently, if they're not documenting buyer conversations, if they are guessing at deal amounts and close dates, your forecast is built on quicksand. The second thing that makes it hard is that there's no standardized method. Different reps qualify deals differently. Different managers inspect pipeline differently. What commit means varies from person to person. You cannot build an accurate forecast when they're using different standards, different languages, different interpretations. And then there's a third component, which is that there's no accountability for forecast accuracy. Most companies, they are measuring whether you hit your sales number or not. Few companies measure whether your forecast was accurate along the way. So there's no incentive for reps or managers to forecast honestly. The incentive is to forecast optimistically so you look good in pipeline reviews. So here's what I've learned. You cannot forecast accurately without three things in place. One, you need to have a rigorous pipeline hygiene and data quality. Two, you need to have a standard qualification forecasting method that everyone follows. And three, you need to have accountability metrics, that reward forecast accuracy, not just pie in the sky optimism. The good news is that these are solvable problems. They require discipline, they require process, and usually some cultural change. But I've observed companies go from plus or minus 20% forecast accuracy to less than 5% variance. And over the next 3 episodes, we are going to walk through exactly how to do this. So the next episode, we'll talk about the foundations, we'll talk about the data hygiene and the qualification standards, and what you need to have in place before you can forecast accurately. And we'll follow up with covering the actual forecasting method, how to inspect the pipeline and build a reliable forecast. And finally, we'll talk about the analytics and accountability systems that keep your forecast honest over time. So if you're tired of being surprised by your bookings every quarter, if you want to make strategic decisions with confidence, if you want your board to trust your projections, go through the entire series. I hope you'll enjoy it. Take care. Bye-bye.